to the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Virtual Congress 2020. I am Dr. Megan Spires, and on behalf of ICLEI Africa, our co-hosts and partners, we thank you for your attendance with us today. Our MC for the first half of this opening ceremony is none other than CNN correspondent Ms. Eleni Jokos, joining us from Johannesburg, South Africa. Over to you, Eleni.
Welcome to our distinguished and honourable guests, ministers, mayors, industry leaders, city officials, as well as researchers, all protocols observed. I'm Eleni Jokos, correspondent for CNN. I'm delighted to be hosting the opening plenary of ICLEI Africa's 5th Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress. Now, this Congress builds off a rich history of ICLEI Africa, convening the continent's foremost thinkers as well as doers to discuss the most pressing issues African cities are facing right now. Now, this year's Congress is no different. We'll be spending the next 8 days interrogating how finance can be unlocked at city scale for transformative climate change action. Now, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we're coming together on this unique online platform. And of course, we will be missing the face-to-face interaction, but we have found innovative ways to facilitate dialogue and build momentum for climate action, even under these circumstances. Now, ICLEI Africa's LoCS4Africa 2020 is co-hosted with the government of Rwanda and the city of Kigali and the Rwandan Local Government Association. And we bring you this Congress in partnership with the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and more of our partners and friends from across the world. So today we have a distinguished panel of global as well as regional leaders who will be addressing us during this opening ceremony. And it is my pleasure to be introducing our very first speaker. Now, we are particularly honored to have the Minister of Environment opening this Congress, representing the host country of LoCS4Africa 2020. Now, Rwanda is well known globally for its dedication and commitment to building a green economy. Rwanda was the first African country to submit their revised nationally determined contribution, which illustrates this bold leadership. Your Excellency, Dr. Mujawa Maria Jeanne d'Arc, Minister of Environment at the Republic of Rwanda, it's over to you.
Heads of UN agencies, fellow ministers, Road Mayor of the City of Kigali, mayors, private sector leaders, representatives of academic institutions, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all delegates tuning in to the 5th edition of the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress. Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress, LoCS4Africa 2020, builds off ICLEI's highly successful Daring Cities Congress that concluded last week. On behalf of the Congress host, the government of Rwanda, the city of Kigali, and ICLEI Africa, I warmly welcome you. This year, 2020, has been an unprecedented year. We have been faced with a health pandemic that has tested the resolve of many nations in responding to the pandemic and recovering from its impacts. What we are being called upon to do now in response to this health pandemic, as well as the ever-present climate change emergency and biodiversity crisis, is to redesign, to transform how our countries and cities develop in response to these 3 overlaid challenges. As a country, Rwanda has for some time now been carving a path to reframe its development trajectory toward an inclusive, low-carbon future, as evidenced by our green growth and climate resilience strategy. Our post-COVID green recovery plans will enable us to build back better and ensure a resilient, sustainable future with well-being and inclusiveness at the center of our plans. Rwanda has for many years been a world leader in terms of how we as a country are tackling climate change. This was again illustrated in 2020 with Rwanda being the first least developed country in the world to submit our revised nationally determined contribution. Our NDC outlines bold action to tackle climate change, including a monitoring, reporting, and verification framework that will allow tackling of climate finance flows for NDC implementation. Our NDC also includes sector-specific implementation plans and links our actions to the Sustainable Development Goals. For Rwanda and for many of our African countries, adaptation to the impacts of climate change and energy access are major priorities. Our revised NDC reflects this focus, and so do recent policies passed by our country, including the Vision 2050, National Strategy for Transformation, and the National Environment and Climate Change Policy. As you can see, we have made bold policy reforms to tackle climate change, and we will continue to do so. Having said that, we have also made bold commitment to greenhouse gas emission reduction. And through our NDC, we have committed to a 38% reduction against business as usual emissions by 2030. To achieve the commitments housed in our NDC requires 11 billion USD. And we have a clear plan on how to mobilize this finance via climate finance, international market mechanisms, and international cooperative approaches. Part of Rwanda's finance solution lies with the Rwanda Green Fund, FONERWA, our groundbreaking environment and climate change fund. It is the engine of green growth in Rwanda, providing technical and financial support to the best public and private projects that align with Rwanda's commitment to a green economy. We, as a country, recognize the urgency of responding to climate change urgently within this decade of action. This is why our NDC has such a strong focus on finance, implementation, and action. This is also why the Congress LoCS4Africa 2020, with its focus on finance for change, could not be more important at this juncture in history. An important cross-cutting theme of LoCS4Africa 2020 is multi-level governance. We, as a country, have placed significant emphasis on having a strong multi-level governance framework in place. Rwanda National Decentralization Policy has allowed local governments to become the main implementer of our national policies. As we all know, cities are where the rubber hits the road. This is the scale of government closest to our citizens and at the forefront when it comes to dealing with the implications of climate change emergency, the biodiversity crisis, and health pandemics such as COVID-19. We thus welcome LoCS4Africa's 2020 focus on action in cities and applaud initiatives such as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and Urban Natural Assets for Africa, which focus on assisting African cities in tackling climate change and the biodiversity crisis, respectively. In particular, I encourage all participants at this Congress to boldly discuss ways in which, supported by national government and in alignment with national goals and commitments, local governments can receive the resources they need to deliver transformative climate change and biodiversity actions. The government of Rwanda wishes all delegates fruitful discussions. We will be engaging throughout the Congress, and we especially look forward to co-developing the LoCS4Africa Finance Roadmap, which will detail tangible next steps to be taken to tackle climate change on the continent. I thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those insights. It is clear that Rwanda is truly an inspiration to all of us in terms of their climate change leadership. And for those of you that have visited Rwanda, you'll know that it's entrenched in the fabric of the nation. We now welcome the Honorable Mayor of Kigali, Mayor Prudence Rubingisa, who is welcoming us to LoCS4Africa 2020 and was also part of the closing plenary of ICLEI's Daring Cities Congress. Now, LoCS4Africa 2020 is building off the significant momentum generated by the Daring Cities Congress, and will be deepening those conversations held during this global Congress within the African context. Mayor, over to you.
Honorable Minister of Environment, Dr. Maria Jean d'Arc, fellow mayors, representatives of UN agencies, private sector leaders, those from academic institutions, and all delegates joining us today from around the world for the 5th edition of the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress. Good morning. We, the city of Kigali, as co-hosts with our national government and ICLEI Africa, we welcome one and all to what is the first of its kind during 2020. As a virtual Congress focusing on finance, climate change, and African cities, this Congress will take forward and discuss further the outcomes of ICLEI's Global Congress, which is Daring Cities, within the African context. During the next 2 weeks, we will co-develop a climate finance roadmap that will detail tangible next steps that will enhance finance and implementation of climate change actions in African cities. Kigali, as Rwanda's capital city, has been encouraged and enabled by our national government's leadership in response to the climate change challenges that we've been facing. Our city houses close to 50% of the Rwandan urban population and is rapidly urbanizing within the context of rapid change. Understanding our climate change risks and vulnerabilities is very crucial and very essential. We are particularly proud of the detailed work we have done with ICLEI and UN Habitat in developing Kigali's risks and vulnerability assessment and greenhouse gas emission inventory, both of which have fed into our core policy documents, such as the Kigali Master Plan that has been recently approved and launched. It is time for action. We cannot wait any longer. And this is why Local Climate Solutions for Africa theme this year is Finance for Change. We have leaders with us from across the globe and continent who will share best practices in unlocking finance for climate change actions. It is essential that this finance flows to cities, who engage closest with community members who are bearing the brunt of climate change impacts. Mobilizing finance cannot occur without effective multi-level governance, and in particular, national government plays a vital role in creating an enabling environment for cities to access climate finance. As we have heard from Honorable Minister of Environment of the Republic of Rwanda, Dr. Mjomariya, our country, Rwanda, has taken significant strides in this regard. And similarly, the private sector has a vital role to play in working with government to harness private and public expertise, innovations, and resources. The cross-cutting themes of Local Climate Solution for Africa 2020 could never be more pertinent. We must recover and redesign during and also after this COVID-19 pandemic with climate resilience, gender equality, and multi-level governance as central principles that are guiding us. We thank each and every delegate for this attendance and contributions over the next 2 weeks. And as the city of Kigali, the co-host, we are looking forward to engaging with all of you in this journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you to the Honorable Mayor of Kigali for your significant leadership and foresight in co-hosting this vital Congress, especially during these trying times. We now turn to Mayor Vincent de Paul Kanyanja, who is the Mayor of Entebbe, Uganda, and also Chair of ICLEI Africa's Regional Executive Committee.
My name is Kanyanja Vincent de Paul, Mayor in Entebbe Municipal Council. On behalf of ICLEI Africa Regional Executive Committee and on behalf of Entebbe Municipal Council, I wish to welcome all of you distinguished delegates to the 220 Virtual Congress on Localizing Climate Solutions for Africa. Generating climate solutions is halfway the equation of climate change mitigation. The full equation is when finances are identified to put climate solutions into action. And therefore, I'm very excited about this year's theme of financing for change. Without finances, such solutions will remain with the innovators, will remain inactive, and the rest of the world, the local communities that are faced with the challenges of climate change, won't enjoy these solutions. With finances, some of these solutions can easily be promoted world over and applied wherever needed. In Entebbe, we have generated a solution of waste to wealth, and we are to implement this with partnership with one of the local industrialists. We are going to recycle all the degradable materials into industrial materials, and for the degradable, we are going to turn that into manure to promote urban farming and also promote food security. The government of Uganda has undertaken to fast-track nationally determined contributions, NDCs, and this will help to upscale public and private investment in climate change mitigation measures. Declaring the nationally determined contributions is a critical strategy at national level because each country knows what is best for it and what are the threats in regard to climate change. In Uganda, we are faced with flooding. The water levels of Lake Victoria and the Lake River Nile Basin network are high. Floods are all over. Malaria is rampant. Deforestation is on the rise, and wetland degradation is rampant. So these are some of the some of the challenges that are to be addressed at the national level, and the strategy of determining what the Uganda government has to contribute in regard to mitigating these challenges has been identified. As I conclude, allow me appreciate our hosts, the government of Rwanda and the city of Kigali, our sponsors, COMESA, ICLEI, and other partners for enabling the hosting of the 220 Virtual Congress on Localizing Climate Solutions for Africa. I wish all you distinguished delegates fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Mayor, for your inspiring words and for your long-term leadership in driving sustainable development in your city and inspiring others while doing so. We now turn to further north on the continent to the beautiful blue city of Chefchaouen, Morocco. Mayor Safiani is also an ICLEI Regional Executive Committee member and member of the Global Covenant of Mayors Board. Mayor, over to you.
Madame la vice-secrétaire générale des Nations Unies, Madame la ministre, Madame le maire et Monsieur le maire, excellents participants. Tout d'abord, je remercie ICLEI et les co-organisateurs de m'avoir invité à cet important événement. Effectivement, par rapport à votre question, les villes jouent un rôle très important dans la lutte contre le changement climatique. Tout d'abord, parce que plus de 60% de la population mondiale vit dans les villes. Deuxièmement, parce que plus environ 80% de la consommation d'énergie se fait dans les villes. Troisièmement, parce que plus de 70% des gaz à effet de serre se font au niveau des villes. Quatrièmement, si on prend le protocole de Paris, c'est plus des 2/3 des actions qui sont prévues, ils doivent se faire au niveau des villes. Donc, et finalement, la majorité des impacts négatifs des changements climatiques se font au niveau des villes et ce sont des villes en général qui sont victimes de ces changements-là. C'est pour cela qu'il est important que les villes s'impliquent dans cette lutte mondiale contre les changements climatiques. Au protocole de Paris, on parlait pratiquement de 2 degrés. Le rapport GIEC, il nous a donné un rapport sur 1,5 et nous avons vu que c'est vraiment des impacts vraiment alarmants. Et nous avons vu l'année dernière l'appel de M. le secrétaire général des Nations Unies sur l'urgence climatique. Donc c'est pour cela qu'on n'a pas notre choix que d'augmenter nos ambitions au niveau mondial, au niveau des gouvernements nationaux et au niveau des villes pour combattre ensemble les effets des changements climatiques. Effectivement, nous avons fait des grands efforts au niveau de la ville de Chefchaouen pour que la ville soit durable et amie du climat. Et ça depuis des années. Et il y a 2 ans, nous avons élaboré une vision, la vision 2030 de Chefchaouen pour l'implémentation au niveau local des objectifs de développement durable, les 17. Et c'était un exercice très important. Et bien sûr, nous avons mis en place un certain nombre d'actions sous forme de plans d'action. Nous avons réalisé quelques-unes. C'est en cours de recherche de financement d'autres. mais je pourrais dire que nous sommes bien avancés et les étapes qui sont en cours ou les prochaines étapes, d'ailleurs, nous sommes en train de réaliser un vaste programme de sécurisation de l'alimentation en eau potable de la ville de Chefchaouen, avec un financement national et international, et aussi un vaste programme de généralisation de l'assainissement liquide. Et là, ce sont que des exemples. En plus, bien sûr, la mise à niveau de notre réseau d'éclairage public, en le rendant, bien sûr, en utilisant la technologie LED avec une option smart, et aussi d'autres solutions qui sont en cours de recherche de financement, et notamment pour le transport public et d'autres aspects. Donc, nous avons bien sûr un plan, nous avons une vision, et nous sommes en train de mettre en œuvre. La solution, c'est de trouver des financements au niveau local, au niveau national et au niveau international. Oui, c'est très important. C'est très important d'avoir des démarches et des engagements comme le Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, donc la Convention mondiale des villes pour le climat et l'énergie, parce que oui, au niveau local, nous avons bien sûr des élus qui sont convaincus, des fonctionnaires qui sont accompagnés, qui nous appuient, et aussi nous avons une société civile et le secteur privé qui sont là. Mais il nous fallait avoir des démarches structurées et structurantes, et des engagements et des manières de comment faire des choses. Et ça, la Convention des maires nous a beaucoup aidé pour faire ça. Parce que ce sont des étapes très claires et des démarches, des méthodologies très claires. Donc, un engagement politique local, ça a été fait, bien sûr, de la planification. Et avant la planification, on a fait l'inventaire des gaz à effet de serre. Ça se fait par toutes les villes qui ont joint la Convention des maires. Comme ça, on chiffre les choses. Puis, on établit des plans d'action pour l'énergie durable. Et ça, c'est vraiment important. Et on est passé récemment à un plan d'action climat qui a été élaboré. Donc, ça, c'est un accompagnement. Et puis, c'est un appui aussi à la recherche de financement, et notamment des finances climat. Et là, je peux citer, par exemple, maintenant, on vient de lancer le GAFund qui est très important, qui est ouvert aux villes. Il y avait d'autres initiatives dont GECOM était leader. Et je pourrais dire que des organisations comme GECOM, comme ICLEI, comme CGLU, comme C40, des villes, ils sont vraiment importants pour accompagner des villes. Au niveau des GECOM, maintenant, il y a plus de 10 000 villes au niveau monde qui ont rejoint. Un grand travail qui se fait en Afrique, soit il y a un programme subsaharien, comme vous connaissez très bien, et pour les villes subsahariennes, et aussi nous avons aussi un autre programme, ClimaMed, qui tous les deux, ils sont cofinancés par l'Union européenne. Et là, ça nous aide aussi à avoir l'expertise et à transformer nos plans d'action en projets qui pourront être présentés aux bailleurs de fonds et qui pourraient être bancables parce que nous n'avons pas des compétences adéquates pour faire ça. Et là, GECOM, ICLEI et les autres réseaux peuvent nous aider et aident les villes et les accompagnent pour aboutir au financement. Oui, je crois que c'est très important ce type d'événement parce que ça rassemble les différents niveaux de gouvernance au niveau national, régional, local et même international. Et je crois que maintenant, c'est un temps qui est très spécial. Très spécial parce qu'on se prépare pour la COP26 au niveau Glasgow. Et là, il y aura la révision des NDC. Et là, on parle aussi de LDC, donc au niveau local. Et je pense que ça va être le momentum historique pour que les villes puissent jouer leur rôle. Ils ne peuvent pas, bien sûr, jouer tout seul. Donc, c'est vraiment une coopération, une coordination multiniveau qui est demandée. C'est international, national et local. Et seulement ensemble, on peut faire face à cette crise climatique, je pourrais dire, parce que le secrétaire général, comme je l'ai dit au début, avait parlé l'année dernière de l'urgence. On est devant une urgence climatique. Et je crois que la pandémie, la crise pandémique, on peut aussi la voir d'un autre horizon et la voir comme une opportunité et surtout les plans de relance. Les plans de relance actuels au niveau des pays, au niveau du groupement des pays et des continents, et il faut qu'ils soient verts. il y en a beaucoup qui ont adopté. Ces plans de relance qui vont donner bien sûr des possibilités de financement aux pays, aux villes, je crois que c'est une opportunité de les utiliser avec une manière qui est très cohérente avec les objectifs climat, avec l'implémentation des objectifs de développement durable. On n'a pas la possibilité, on ne peut pas rater cette occasion-là. Je suis très confiant, je suis très optimiste de gérer comme cette crise climatique, cette urgence climatique avec des résultats concrets. Et je crois que cette phase-là, cette post-pandémie et cette préparation à Glasgow, avec l'appui des différents réseaux des villes tels que ICLEI, GECOM, UCLG, C40, etc., je crois que nous, ensemble, on pourra lever les défis avec, bien sûr, les gouvernements nationaux et les organisations internationales.
Well, many thanks to Mayor Sefiani for these key points and, of course, for highlighting how your city is translating plans into action. I now welcome Honorable Mohammed Ajay Sowa, Mayor of Accra, who, like Mayor Sefiani, is also a board member of the Global Covenant of Mayors. Accra is a leading covenant of mayors in Sub-Saharan African cities that is taking bold climate change actions. Mayor, over to you.
Thanks for having me. Let me first of all acknowledge the presence of the UN Under Secretary and then the Minister for Environment of Rwanda, my colleague mayors from Africa, colleague speakers and delegates participating in this international conference, and ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity given to me to speak on this very important subject, what is dear to my heart personally, and also a critical matter which is confronting African cities. It is critical for cities to lead on their own action plans and prioritizing efforts that increase our resilience and adaptive capacity to the changes that we face. Support from city networks such as C40, ICLEI Africa, GCOM, and ICLEI Africa has brought funding, guidance, and connection to wide network and technical support for Africa, including Accra. Over 10,000 cities worldwide, including 250 cities in Africa, have made bold climate commitments through the Global Covenant of Mayors. We follow the principle of leaving no one behind. Accra is set on ensuring that not only our city moves ahead, but that we build the capacity and resilience of our neighboring cities to build a resilient Africa together. The COVID-19 pandemic has offered a chance for us to collectively rebuild and reimagine our cities will look like in the future. By addressing the climate crisis in an inclusive way, cities of all sizes can be essential economic engines for a green and just recovery. The 10,000 plus GCOM cities stand ready to partner with national governments and international institutions to solve both the global economic and climate crisis through local climate commitments, innovative financing models, and a focus on sustainable infrastructure. Thank you. Thank you once again. Indeed, at the metropolitan level, officers are generally not equipped to handle their climate project proposals and project development process from a capacity, that skill and funding perspective. This is where national government and initiatives such as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and GCOM play a critical role. The Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa focuses on the early stage project development of urban climate-friendly infrastructure projects. The initiative supports local governments such as the Accra Metropolitan Assembly, to move from planning to implementation and attract climate funding at the local level. One of the key advantages of this initiative is that as a network of cities, it facilitates partnerships and learning among cities. In our 1992 Constitution of the Republic of Ghana, provides for decentralization and local government. That creates a framework for citizens' participation in decision-making and local governance. Finance is a key to effective decentralized governance. Resourcing subnational governments remains a central challenge to effective decentralization in Ghana. As in many other developing countries, it is well recognized that if local governments are to carry out their decentralized functions effectively, they must possess sufficient financial resources, the flexibility to raise such revenues, and the ability and mandate to make decisions about expenditures. Ghana made strides toward authorizing local government borrowing and deepening fiscal decentralization with the passage of the Public Financial Management Act 921. This act, which was passed in 2016, makes provisions for local government authorities to borrow funds and become liable for their debts, unless such debt is otherwise explicitly guaranteed by the central government. The details of how these will work still being ironed out. But this is an important step toward unlocking finance at the local level. Thank you. So in our quest to build the capacities of African cities to be resilient and adaptive to the climate conditions which are changing, we are grateful to the support given to us by C40 cities that had provided technical support to Accra towards the development of our climate action plan and launched it a couple of weeks ago. Accra remains as the second city that has developed the climate action plan. Again, we are also grateful to GECOM for providing us also with the leadership and technical support in reaching out to many cities also in Accra and beyond, so that we bring all of them together on board as we fight the climate together. And finally, to ICLEI, our also technical partners that has been lending support to us, especially in the area of waste management, which remains the highest emitter of emissions in Accra. We are hopeful that a combined effort of these organizations to the city of Accra and beyond will lead to Africa becoming more resilient to climate change. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Honourable Mayor Sowa, for highlighting the critical role that initiatives such as the Global Covenant of Mayors and City Networks such as ICLEI Africa play in catalyzing climate change action. I'd now like to welcome Mr. Landlislas Ngendahimana, Secretary General of RALGA, to please take the floor.
Thank you very much, distinguished participants and guests, or protocols observed. I think the question is clear, and it is, I would not say it is simple, but it is clear. But I needed to define, first of all, the environment in which the local government associations are operating, like mine. Rwanda Association of Local Government Authorities, RALGA, is a membership organization that brings together all decentralized administrative entities in Rwanda, namely the city of Kigali and the districts, as well as the sub-district entities. RALGA has derived its reason for existence from the decentralization process, which is meant to transfer authority, resources, responsibility, and accountability from central government to local government. According to the decentralization policy in Rwanda, the central government is responsible for policy formulation, legislation, resources mobilization, capacity building, and monitoring and evaluation. On the other side, on the other hand, local governments are responsible for local governance and local development through implementation of all government programs and local development strategies. And in this context, the responsibility of the associations, such as ours, RALGA, is to support our members through capacity building, advocacy, and representation, and to provide some specialized services, such as consultancies and capacity building interventions. If I may say, since local governments are the engine for sustainable development, their associations should support them in raising awareness in climate change, risks and mitigation mechanism, conducting studies on local revenue potentials and local economic potentialities, so that they can finance green infrastructure and green economies. This requires us as associations to act as a backup and think tanks for advocacy in resources mobilization and unlocking climate finances resources. It is also important for the associations, this is very, very important, to represent our members in the preparation of the nationally determined contributions so that they can become responsive and locally driven. In Rwanda, we are very happy, at least, we are very happy that local governments and the central government complement each other. RALGA, on one side, remains the platform for facilitation, and on the other hand, the ministry in charge of local government is the platform for coordination. Before I can conclude on this question, I wish to invite, because this is what we are saying, but I wish to invite all of you to visit Rwanda, at least to visit our association RALGA, so that you can witness the multi-level collaboration between local government and the central government, and above all, to share our experience in supporting the local economic development, climate change response, circular economy, and in unlocking local climate financing. Rwandan local governments are safe, they are green, and they are clean. Most importantly, our responsibility is to build this platform for facilitation between the central government and the local government so that we can develop green economies, clean country, not only clean cities, but clean country, and above all, to represent our members and to build their capacities so that they can maximize their local revenue potential and their potentialities so that we can generate enough resources to develop our green economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ngendahimana. ICLEI has been a long-standing advocate for the importance of multi-level governance. It is inspiring to hear the critical role that RALGA plays in facilitating dialogue between national as well as local governments, which is especially important in the development of nationally determined contributions. Now, we now move to another continent, Europe, and we welcome Mr. Stefano Signore, who heads up the unit of the European Commission that funds significant climate change and energy work on the African continent, such as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa initiative. The floor is yours, Mr. Signore.
Thank you, Ms. Georgos, the Minister, Mayors, and distinguished guests. It is my pleasure to speak at the opening ceremony of the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Virtual Congress. As the previous speakers have mentioned, the world is becoming increasingly urbanized, and as population grows and urbanization intensifies, people living in cities are at higher risks to suffer the effect of climate change, including floods, rising sea levels, stronger heat and cold waves, as well as other climate-related hazards. On top of that, those most vulnerable to climate change, the poor, are increasingly concentrated in cities. That is why the European Union is strongly committed to the effort of achieving SDG 7 and 13 on sustainable energy and climate change in the African continent. This year, we have taken our partnership with Africa to the next level, based on principles of shared interests and common values. There is a significant focus on integrating sustainable energy and climate action agenda across all sectors of the economy and to achieve more inclusive and sustainable energy systems. In a strong and coordinating response to the COVID-19 pandemic, a collaboration between the European Commission, the EU member states, and the European financial institutions has mobilized more than 36 billion euros in response to the crisis in all our partner countries. And we are also working on a global recovery initiative linking debt relief and investment to the Sustainable Development Goals to be taken at the level of the United Nations. The European Commission is strengthening its engagement with cities in Sub-Saharan Africa to increase city resilience in the context of climate change and fast urbanization by strengthening their capacity in advanced urban planning and integrated urban development. In this context, we support several initiatives that are active in the urban sector. For instance, the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa initiative, which is partnering on this important congress. The initiative was launched in 2015 to support cities in meeting the dual challenge of climate change and access to sustainable energy, and we devoted so far 44 million euros to this action. Our aim is now to reach a greater number of beneficiaries and to focus on unlocking climate finance at the local level. I also want to mention a few other programs we are supporting together with other partners. ICLEI, which supports cities by financing studies on climate change projects that unlock public and private investment. Also, the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery, which carries out disaster risk reduction activities in Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries. The program has responded to high demand for improvements in urban infrastructure to make cities more climate resilient and helping metropolitan hubs such as Accra or Kigali. And then local climate adaptive living, so-called LoCal, which supports countries to achieve their nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement and promoting climate resilient communities. More in general, the climate finance support provided by the European Union together with its member states amounted to almost 22 billion euros in 2019, a 7.4% increase compared to the previous year. Given that development cooperation resources alone will not be sufficient to achieve our goals, active promotion of public and private investment is key to accelerate the transition to sustainable and green economies. The EU External Investment Plan, which is already operational, is expected to generate up to 44 billion euros of additional investment, mainly in Africa, for low carbon and resilient infrastructure. And we will be significantly scaling up this investment under the next multi-annual financial framework that we start next year. To this end, a new generation of financial instruments is being rolled out based on risk sharing and guarantees. The overall objective is always to lower the risk and mobilize public and private resources towards productive investment to support sustainable, green and inclusive jobs and growth in Africa. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for those insights, Mr. Signore, and for describing the European Commission's impressive portfolio of action on the African continent, especially in the area of finance. And indeed, a new generation of financial instruments is required if we are to unlock finance for climate action with urgency necessary. And of course, the European Commission's commitment to this is exemplary. It is now my pleasure to invite the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC, Mr. Ovais Sarmad, to please take the floor. Over to you, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's a pleasure for me to join this important and equally ambitious Local Climate Solutions for Africa event that you're all hosting and participating in on behalf of United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. Let me share a few thoughts and perspectives. We are now approaching the 5-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement. While we can take some satisfaction in our collective accomplishments over the intervening years, that satisfaction must be tempered by the sobering reality of how much more work still remains to be done. As nations rush to respond to the immediate crisis of the pandemic that we are all living through, they must recognize that the impacts of climate change also demand an urgent response. The recently launched World Meteorological Report, State of the Climate in Africa for 2019, which addresses the gap of climate information for adaptation planning. That report emphasizes the growing impact of climate change on the African continent, affecting most severely the most vulnerable people, unfortunately. It exacerbates food insecurity, population displacement, and stress on water resources. I'm sure we all remember the tropical cyclone Idai was among the most destructive tropical cyclone ever recorded in the southern hemisphere, which resulted in hundreds of deaths and hundreds of thousands were displaced. The continent has had to face devastating floods, an invasion of desert locusts, and now the looming drought because of the La Nina event. The adverse impact of climate change will only get much worse if we fail to act decisively and urgently. And this is what we need to do. Indeed, COP26 and other events from this year have been postponed, but it has not postponed the need for the parties and many other stakeholders to accelerate work towards fulfilling commitments they have already made. And let me remind some of those commitments, which include submission of new or revised national climate action plans in 2020, rules for markets, finance-related matters, including long-term finance and finance for adaptation, and enhanced transparency framework. Nations must absolutely 100% need to finish this work, especially the submission of the NDCs. We are currently behind schedule. Currently, we are doing everything we can, given the current situation, to help everyone to submit their NDCs with higher ambition. Even virtually, the UNFCCC Secretariat has been continuing its work in 2020 and beyond, with parties and all parts of civil society, to reflect the urgency of the climate change agenda and to make progress. So despite the postponement of COP26, our work at the UN Climate Change Secretariat continues unabated. For example, the high-level champions for global climate action have been exploring innovative and alternative ways to support such collaboration this year. And in a few weeks, from 9th to the 19th November, a series of virtual dialogues across multiple time zones will be convened in order to reflect on the progress in mitigation and adaptation, which are made by non-party stakeholders during a challenging year 2020, and to create an enabling environment for crossing 10 tipping points towards systems transformation alongside national enhancement of the NDCs and the development of long-term strategies. So in short, virtual engagements and events like the one we are participating today are crucial to keep the conversation, reflection, and action on climate change. Perhaps nowhere is the work on climate action more important than in our cities and urban settlements. This is where the climate battle will be won or lost. Involvement of cities in both mitigation and adaptation planning is crucial. Mitigation and moving away from fossil fuels will require investments that enable the scaling up renewable energy. IRENA's recent Global Renewable Energy Report suggests that investment in an energy system fit for the 21st century would not just result in decarbonization, but could also push jobs in the renewable sector to 42 million by 2050. It could result in the GDP growth globally to 2.4%, amounting to a cumulative gain of $98 trillion by mid-century. These are significant numbers, which greatly exceed the projected investment needed to transform the energy system. And we are seeing that such changes are indeed possible at city level. For instance, Joburg and Cape Town are now preparing to source their own power. Within the next 3 to 5 years, the cities intend to shift away from coal-generated electricity to more sustainable sources, including solar power and that is generated from landfill gas. But we must recognize the social and economic inequalities. Climate decisions are only just if everyone benefits equally, including through financial aid, technology transfer, capacity building, and assistance that is required to countries in the developing world. Boosting ambition, building a more resilient future, and providing a just transition from fossil to green, those are the 3 key elements we need to build a cleaner, greener, and healthier future. Local governments face specific challenges. We know that building cleaner, greener, more climate-friendly and sustainable cities and communities should be our guiding principles for the future. However, while it's possible, although it's certainly not easy to secure the financial resources, technology, and development plans to accomplish this, it is much, much more difficult to secure the political agreement to move forward with the urgency that is required. This is the real challenge at the local level, getting all political actors to move together in one direction. There are significant social and political realities that need to be fully managed in order to make these big changes. It's a major undertaking, but without that cooperation and proper management, progress is difficult, and especially so at the local level. Let me briefly talk to you about adaptation. As I mentioned earlier, WMO reported on the growing climate risks for African countries. In many countries, significant proportions of the population are in urban areas, as are most economic activities. Most value chains and supply chains are connected to cities. Therefore, activities to climate-proof economies and protect life are part of the city management. It is therefore important for cities to play an active role in national adaptation efforts. Support is available through the Green Climate Fund to support the formulation of national adaptation plans, and it is imperative that cities play an active role in production of the NAPs to ensure successful adaptation through the national adaptation plans process, which are open and flexible nationwide, and efforts to build adaptive capacity to cope with climate change, and that is open to actors from all levels and sectors. Many countries are interested in taking a closer look at urban issues in their adaptation planning processes. Finding ways to vertically integrate, linking local adaptation in cities at the national level planning is vital to help build climate resilient cities. National government offices driving adaptation planning are in cities, and so it should be relatively easy to ensure smooth coordination and collaboration. These are challenging times, but they have required us to work in unconventional ways. I urge local governments and businesses to look to the bigger picture. What is at stake, and at what we are trying to achieve together with respect to our overall climate goals. We have the roadmap to get there. The Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda give the world a solid blueprint for building forward. So with those remarks, ladies and gentlemen, let me leave you with our full commitment and support to work very closely with you, especially the cities. And I thank ICLEI for organizing and hosting this event. And I wish you all the best. Please keep safe and hope to be in touch with you again in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Samad. I'm sure that the outcomes of the next 8 days of LoCS4Africa and the finance roadmap that will be developed as an output of this Congress will be useful to feed into the UNFCCC process in the lead up to COP26. Now, our next speaker is an extraordinary woman, Miss Maimouna Mod Sharif. She's Under Secretary General of the UN and Executive Director of UN Habitat. She also led the charge for many years as to the importance of prioritizing climate change action at city scale. Ms. Sharif, over to you.
Excellencies, honorable ministers, honorable mayors, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. The tale of the ongoing coronavirus pandemic and the saga of climate change are inherently interlinked, presenting both challenges and opportunities in the context of a rapidly urbanizing Africa. We have seen an array of innovative solutions from African cities in dealing with climate change impacts and with COVID-19, but many challenges remain. First, most emerging infectious diseases and almost all recent pandemics originate in wildlife, and there is evidence that increasing human pressure on the natural environments enables disease emergence. In Africa, rural-urban migration driven by climate change continues to cause loss of natural habitats and force humans to trespass more into the habitats of energy and other needs. With lack of access to other forms of energy, people in many African countries depend substantially on the burning of biomass, which increases land degradation and encroachment into natural habitats and leads to more chances of human contact with wild animals. Solar, wind, and geothermal power are not only more environmentally friendly, but also less costly than coal. Burkina Faso, Kenya, and Nigeria have already promoted the use of renewable energy to control the challenges of COVID-19 triggered in the sector, and it is time for others to follow. Second, the health challenges stemming from the coronavirus are clear and extensive, especially in Africa, where the health systems of countries are especially weak. It is already very clear that improving health infrastructure and reducing the vulnerability of society to health threats must become a priority. The third challenge relates to food security, as the pandemic comes at a time when underlying climate change impacts are already compromising food and water security. COVID-19 is further ravaging food industries, especially staple foods, which are critical for the livelihood in Africa. In cities across Africa, from women farmers tending to urban microgardens in Dakar to green belt stretching across Maputo, urban and peri-urban agriculture has emerged as a vital resource in the livelihood strategies of many city dwellers, and it has thrived during the COVID-19 lockdowns. Finally, the current pandemic further complicates an already sensitive multi-hazard climate in Africa, where as a result of climate change, natural hazards in the regions has been increasingly in frequency and intensity. Cities in Africa now have to think about preparing for natural disaster with a coronavirus lens. This will require new and innovative approaches to disaster risk reduction. For example, when planning shelters and evacuation, physical distancing and hygiene need to be taken into account. There is a silver lining, and there are clear opportunities offered by the coronavirus pandemic, which the continent must seize while the momentum is present. In Africa, building long-term development strategies post-COVID-19 that are focused on low-carbon, climate-resilient development pathways will bring multiple wins for society, economies, and environment. If demands for it is fueled, the pandemic can lead to initiating a transformational and green recovery powered by the continent's abundant clean energy and leading to the creation of green jobs and increased trade. Investing in climate can help drive green urban economy recovery and facilitate the transition to carbon neutral cities on continent. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those inspirational words, Ms. Sharif. I'd like to introduce now a second extraordinary woman, Ms. Inga Anderson, Under Secretary at the General of the UN and Executive Director of the UN Environment Programme known as UNEP. No one more than Ms. Anderson understands the importance of tackling the intellect challenges of the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis in a systemic way. The floor is yours, Ms. Anderson.
Well, if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it is that our relentless degradation of nature has real consequences. And COVID-19 is not the only crisis that we face. We are, in fact, facing three planetary crises: the crisis of nature, the crisis of climate, and the crisis of pollution and waste. And these crises are driven by our unsustainable consumption and production. In fact, we use about 1.6 planets in our consumption patterns, and that's clearly not sustainable. So to address these crises, we need to rethink our relationship with nature, and that will require massive transformations. And since about half of our GDP either relies moderately or highly on nature and ecosystem services, and since we are losing about $479 billion a year in our continued degradation of nature and degradation of ecosystem services, we clearly need a new paradigm. We need to recognize the value of nature and its services, because life quality is not just purely GDP. So what does that mean in terms of cities? I'd like to put forward 3 points here. First, we need to bring nature back into cities through, for example, urban forests, urban parks, green spaces, green roofs, and green corridors. And that will come with benefits for well-being, for our young people, for human well-being, as I mentioned, and our health, from air quality improvements, from flood control, and from reducing urban heat islands, and overall reducing heat, as well as the cooling needs in buildings would be reduced. And of course, once we make corridors within the cities, green corridors, livability and quality of life will go up. The second point that cities can do is to think about nature in the peri-urban areas, nature around cities, which these areas are under pressure from sprawl, often because of poor planning. And here, good planning needs to be impacted so that we think about density, particularly for strategic and critical uses of land, of materials, resources, because the more sprawled out and the lower the density, the more resources, land, and the higher carbon footprint we will create in those peri-urban areas, and the less livable they become. So going forward, we need to think about interconnected and more self-sufficient neighborhoods, both in the urban and the peri-urban space, where nature is closer to citizens and where economic activity and employment can be reached within a walking or a biking distance. This 10-minute city, the 10-minute neighborhood, is becoming a thing that more and more people are speaking about in the context of urban planning. And the third thing that we need to think about is to reduce the pressure on nature away from cities. Cities have, of course, a higher footprint because of greater populations, so they can take the lead in going away from and finding new ways towards more sustainable consumption and production patterns. In the United Nations Secretary General's brief on COVID-19 in an urban world, we highlighted that cities' critical role on the way towards circularity in keeping materials as long as possible, in keeping the highest value of these materials in the economic cycle, to reduce resource use and to reduce the embodied carbon footprint while creating real job opportunities. Well, Africa has the fastest rate of urban growth. In the next 30 years, Africa's urban areas will become home to an additional 950 million people. And like elsewhere in the world, the region is urbanizing faster than its capacity to plan for these new arrivals. And so it is hard to keep up with adequate infrastructure, transport infrastructure, housing, and energy. And Africa's economic transition and its urban transition, however, is also a very real opportunity to create new social, economic, as well as environmental development models. And that cannot happen without that strong local leadership and action from cities and municipal governments. So how do we strengthen local drivers of smart urbanization? Well, first of all, the national leaders and national governments need to see cities as true contributors and drivers of the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And leaders in the municipal space need to step into that space and show true leadership. We need to facilitate the access of cities to financing, and that includes being able to tap into stimulus packages that are being announced these days. COVID-19 has had a devastating impact on cities, especially the urban poor. But if we dedicate some of these funds, we can boost the abilities of local and municipal and regional governments to truly sustain critical public services and to invest in circularity, invest in sustainable infrastructure, support the economy, to just name a few areas, so that we can drive green growth, that we can drive green jobs, that we can drive green development, that we can drive sustainable options for the future. And finally, our cities belong to us all. And so the communities and the private sector, having them engaged is vital because their voices matter greatly too.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson, for reminding us about the importance of nature and the environment as the backbone of life on Earth. The call is loud and clear. We need to invest in nature, invest in circularity, and invest in sustainability. Over the next 8 days, we will spend time unpacking how we can make this happen at the city level. We now move into the second half of our opening ceremony. We will hear from scientists, youth, climate champions, and city networks. It is now my pleasure to ask one of the world's climate change heroes, Ms. Christiana Figueres, former Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC and co-founder of Global Optimism, to please take the floor.
Honorable Mayor of Kigali and other cities that are with us today, distinguished governors and other top government officials, dear friends, or actually, as I have learned from my African friends, all protocol observed. I am delighted to also welcome you to the 5th Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress. No topic is as important or as urgent as financing for change. In particular, in the African continent, the continent where the average age is 20 years old, a whole decade younger than the average age in the rest of the world, and where population is set to double by 2050. I'm sure we all agree that we have to put ourselves in the position of being able to welcome all of those new brothers and sisters into a world that is inclusive, an economy that is stable, and into ecosystems that are healthy. That is why I am delighted that you are having this meeting where you will be moving towards tangible results and catalyzing climate action on this continent in order to stabilize the current and prepare for a better future. I'm delighted that you will be talking about nature-based solutions, about urban issues, about energy infrastructure and mobility, and above all, about innovation, because it is clear that the way we've been doing things in the past is just not been good enough. We have to put our innovation caps on. We have to think not only out of the box, but perhaps in fact even without a box. And so I am delighted that you are giving yourselves this challenge to think in innovative and creative ways. And the best of all is that you will finish this virtual Congress with a Financing for Change roadmap and action plan that I hope will set very concrete steps forward along a route that is healthy for Africa and that will deliver the well-being that every African city deserves today and tomorrow.
Thank you, Ms. Figueres. The theme for this year's LoCS4Africa could not be more pressing. Unlocking finance at the local level is the final frontier to accelerated climate action on the African continent. And now over to Mr. Nigel Topping, the high-level climate action champion for COP26. Over to you, Mr. Topping.
Halving emissions globally in the next decade and meeting the objectives of the Paris Agreement will only be possible if we make our cities clean, resilient and equitable. We're literally at a unique time in the world's history. Post-COVID, the decisions that governments will make will determine the shape of the future of the global economy. The $10 to $20 trillion of public capital to be injected in the economy has the power to either lock the world in to many more years of pollution and increased climate risks, or to set us on course to halve greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 and build resilience into all investments. I know which outcome I'd prefer, so let's not miss the chance to make it a resilient 1.5 degree world option. But of course, to do this, we need to drive action across all parts of our economy, and effective action requires leadership from national to local levels. It also requires good ideas, good leadership, and a commitment to act. And finance, both public and private, is a critical and catalytic piece in this transformation. The Local Climate Solutions for Africa 2020 Congress is a fantastic place to build the pathway to COP27 in Africa. Indeed, in my role as high-level champion for COP26, I will have the pleasure and honour of working with the high-level champion for COP27 in Africa in 2022. So I look forward to finding out who that person is and working with them. Brokering and fostering relationships between those in the private sector and those in government who might not normally meet or work together, you can draft and craft solutions which lead to sustainable climate resilient transformation. I know that from my own experience, the benefits of bringing together different actors together working on ambition pathways. For example, on electric vehicles, where working with CEOs of car companies, mayors of cities, investors calling on businesses to change, and civil society groups demanding cleaner air, we've been able to craft an accelerating exponential pathway to clean air and clean mobility in the world's cities. You will innovate and have the best ideas for financing, I'm sure. I'm a manufacturing engineer by background, so I always want to get to the do. And in that spirit, I reflect on 3 tools which seem to have a track record to recommend them. Obviously, all will need to be assessed for feasibility and tailored to your local context. First is a city green bond, like the one Kigali and other cities have, which helps build urban infrastructures. The income to service the bond could come from taxes, income from residents. The bond could be used, for example, to raise money for public infrastructure, for private buildings, and for drainage and power grids. Or there are blended venture capital funds with a mix of donor, government, and private sector funds to provide the equity investment in green business. A first loss arrangement is one way to incentivise private investors to come in, to multiply the impact of the limited public money available. And then there are loan schemes where government guarantees loans by commercial banks to vehicle owners to replace or refit vehicles towards a cleaner and cleaner transport system. It's in Africa where there is the greatest need for innovative financing. Such innovation requires visionary leadership in both government and business to take the transformation forward. You can't have one without the other. And I'm really sad that I haven't been able to personally visit Africa this year in my role. I was planning to visit at least twice for the Regional Climate Action Week and for the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting. But I'm delighted that Rwanda, as the host of this conference, with their famous vision and drive, has demonstrated the ability to cut through coordination challenges which are likely to beset any city transformation programme. Where there's a will, there is always a way. And we know that finance arrangements which drive and sustain clean and green city transformation make sense on both a society, a human health and an economic front. I'm confident that green cities will deliver decreased incidences of respiratory diseases and other health problems, increased social interaction, which happens in green public places, and more efficient ways of moving about and earning a living, and a much better environment for our children to thrive in. With my fellow champion Gonzalo Munoz, we want to deliver a legacy to future champions, and we're building a champions team in Africa to launch next week. Our expectation is that city transformation and urban resilience will be a real priority at the heart of our work, informed very much by your deliberations in the coming days. We're looking forward to working with many of you to deliver a better future for Africa and for the whole planet.
Thank you, Mr. Topping. We call on all cities to join the race to zero. The time for action is now. It is now my pleasure to welcome a woman of science, Dr. Deborah Roberts, co-chair of Working Group 2 of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, for some reflections on two pertinent questions. The first is, what should the scientific community most urgently consider within the climate change city space?
I think the key topic for the scientific community really relates to the role of cities as part of the 4 big system transitions that we need to effect if we're going to achieve the high level of ambition of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. I think the real challenge up until this point for science is we've tended to look at cities in a reductionistic manner, really considering elements of the broader urban ecosystem, so transport, food, water provision. And I think the 1.5 report really indicates to us that we've got to think about cities as a system for transformation. And science needs to bring its best to that question. How do we use cities to effect global transformation? I think the importance of science in this COVID or post-COVID world, depending on where you are in the globe, is that this experience of the pandemic has shown just how important it is when you are tackling a global crisis to have access to an evidence-based form of decision-making. Because if you've got limited resources, you've got urgent needs, you've got competing needs, it's very hard to take a directed, focused decision without evidence. And I think this is really where science is coming into its own. Ironically, I think the climate debate has benefited in some strange way from the COVID pandemic, because that's really demonstrated how governments, when faced with a global crisis that is absolutely immediate and requires attention, immediately go to the science to determine what their options are, and amongst those options to help them prioritize. So I think the pandemic has really indicated the value of science. I think the important thing too is, and many people ask me this, is, has COVID shifted the dial on the response to the climate change challenge? And certainly, yes. I mean, I think we'd be unrealistic to not say that. I think in the minds of some decision makers, the most immediate priority is COVID. But there's absolutely no question that the climate change challenge and the biodiversity challenge are even bigger global challenges, even more immediate, impacting even more people with even more devastating impacts. And so if we've responded to one pandemic with the use of science, and we've done that effectively for the most part, then I believe that demonstrates how important in dealing with the present and upcoming challenges of climate change and biodiversity loss, how important science will be in helping decision makers move forward to a more sustainable and equitable world.
Thank you, Dr. Deborah Roberts. The COVID-19 pandemic has indeed cemented the importance of using evidence and science to inform important decisions. It couldn't be more clear that we need to listen to the science and act on mitigating the risks of climate change and biodiversity loss. Next on the program is Mr. Manish Bapna, Executive Vice President and Managing Director of the World Resources Institute. WRI is an institutional member of the NDC Partnership, and with partners and members of the NDCP, like ICLEI, is assisting many African countries in the revision and implementation of their nationally determined contributions. Mr. Bapna, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Manish Bapna. I'm the Executive Vice President of the World Resources Institute. I've been asked to say a few words about the role of research and how to put research into action. And this is a question that I think is just incredibly important, and it goes at the heart of who we are as an organization. We're a global research organization that is aiming to advance action on a number of core sustainable development challenges. We've done quite a bit of research with governments and with other city-level partners in recent years related to low-carbon action in cities. We've been doing work on urban water resilience with the local and national authorities in Ethiopia, Rwanda, South Africa. We've been doing quite a bit of work with both local and national authorities around urban transitions and what role can local governments play to help ensure, inform, create an enabling environment for more low-carbon resilient urban transitions. We also are almost complete with our flagship report, the World Resources Report, which this year is focused on cities. And it's putting forward a very interesting proposition that by focusing on making more equitable cities, equitable in terms of housing, in terms of water, in terms of energy, in terms of transportation, that you can actually create more economically dynamic and environmentally sustainable cities. And through all this research, there's been some really good lessons we've learned, good practices, shall we say, about how to help ensure research is ultimately leads to the type of action we need to see. So four basic points. The first, be very clear about what is the exam question that the research aims to answer, and make sure that everyone is aligned around the question of questions that the researcher analysis looks to answer. The second is to make sure that the target audience, oftentimes the government, the local government, other key departments and ministries, are actively involved throughout the process, because it'll be critical to make sure that the results of the research and analysis are indeed relevant and actionable. So the continuous engagement of the target audience is critical. Third, making sure you have the right set of partners to deliver the research. Different organizations have different comparative advantages, incredibly critical to design the right partnerships to help take the research forward. And fourth, peer review. Peer review is absolutely critical to make sure that the quality and the rigor of the research is sustained. So again, evidence-based research just so important to getting the right types of decisions in terms of policies, in terms of investment flows, in terms of how to build institutions, even more relevant in highly fluid environments like Africa, which are urbanizing so fast. So hope this offers some insights into how to ensure that research translates into action. And I look forward to hearing more about the remarkable outcomes that I'm sure will emerge from this virtual Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Bapna. The youth are holding us to account. They are inspiring us. They are driving us all to change. We are now joined by Ms. Aminatou Bilal, who is a member of the African Union Youth Advisory Council. Over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here today I will present my views on the biggest opportunities for Africa and in the coming years, and how would unlocking finance at the local level enable this. Africa's fast-growing population and markets present important opportunities for business in an environment of slowing global growth. At the same time, greater innovation and investment from businesses is essential to meet Africa's unfulfilled demand for goods and services, close the gaps in the infrastructure, create jobs, and decrease poverty. We have two indicators from the World Bank underline the continent's promise. First, of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in 2018, 6 were in Africa, with Ghana at the top of the world ranking. Secondly, in the World Bank's 2019 Doing Business Index, 5 of the 10 most improved countries are in Africa, and 1/3 of all reforms recorded globally were in Sub-Saharan Africa. So one of the biggest opportunities for Africa in the coming years is certainly its population. Africa's current population of around 1.2 billion is projected to reach 1.7 billion by 2030, and more than 80% of Africa's population growth over the next few decades will occur in cities, making it the biggest and the fastest urbanizing region in the world. At the same time, incomes are rising across much of the continent, generating new business opportunities in the consumer market. So these trends are spurring growing markets in a range of sectors where Africans have unmet needs, such as food, beverages, pharmaceuticals, financial services, healthcare, and education. And the second biggest opportunity is that Africa is industrializing. An African industrial revolution is underway as manufacturers ramp up production of everything from processed food to automobiles. The third biggest opportunity is that Africa is pushing to close the infrastructure gap. We all know that poor infrastructure is one of the key obstacles to investment and growth in Africa. For example, nearly 600 million Africans lack access to electricity grid. But while Africa's infrastructure still lags behind that of other developing regions, significant progress has been made. Africa's annual investment in infrastructure has doubled to around $80 billion a year since the beginning of this century. That represents a big opportunity for investors and entrepreneurs with the imagination to help solve Africa's infrastructure challenges. The fourth biggest opportunity for Africa is the abundance of its natural resources, both in agriculture and mineral resources. Africa has long been known for its resource abundance, and to date, Africa has struggled to translate these resources into shared wealth and sustained economic development. New innovations and investment in the local level are needed to change the picture and create exciting growth opportunities for business. The opportunity number 5 is the potential of increasing digital and mobile access to its population. According to the UN, 226 million youth aged between 15 and 24 lived in Africa in 2015, representing nearly 20% of Africa's population, making up 1/5 of the world's youth population. If one includes all people aged below 35, this number increases to a staggering 3/4 of Africa's population. Young Africans are already contributing to the fight of the climate change. Many platforms have been created, such as the Africa Youth Climate Hub and the Resilient 40, among others, where young people share their local initiatives with their peers. At the local level, young Africans can take advantage of these regional platforms or networks to bring the conversation to the local level, to assert their right to participation in discussions with elected officials and the government. The youth are energetic, so they can contribute to reforestation campaigns to improve the quality of the land and fight against climate change. The innovation and creativity of the African youth must be highlighted to provide sustainable solutions at the local level, such as, for example, the use of solar energy combined with new technologies. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bilal. Next, we turn to Mr. Hastings Chikoko, Regional Director for Africa at C40. He will reflect on 2 questions, the first of which is, how can city networks assist African cities in gaining access to the resources they need to implement climate change actions? Over to you, Mr. Chikoko.
We need to do more on mobilizing the cities in our networks to effectively join the advocacy work on climate finance at the global and national levels. There isn't just, to me, I just find that there isn't enough climate finance flows to local governments. I think studies have been clear. They have shown that I think almost less than 10% of the investment in climate finance is directed to actions at local government level. We need to begin to strongly push that. Of course, we have been pushing for some time, but with COVID-19, which has disrupted city or local government budgets and revenue streams, we need to even push more. We therefore need to support cities to be sending strong messages to enable the following. Number one, basically to support national governments in pushing for financing commitments that have been agreed under the Framework Convention on Climate Change. Secondly, we need to influence governments and multilateral finance institutions to create opportunities for climate finance allocation to local governments, especially realizing that city climate action has significant contribution to achieving the nationally determined contributions. Then finally, we need to support cities to explore alternative financing. They need to be thinking of increasing the engagement with investors and private sector, like seeking capital funds. We need to make the case for city pension funds, use of city pension funds for climate action. And we also need to shift investments by positioning divest invest action to basically drive divestment from fossil fuels. So those are some of the areas that I think as city networks, we need to focus on at present. I think to me, the main issue, given our experience with C40 cities, and I think maybe ICLEI may identify with it too, is the ability for African cities to translate their challenges into business propositions that attract financiers or investors. Money does not just come. It is attracted by solid policies, strategies, action plans, as well as bankable proposals. Fact. So I think as long as cities don't really have this in place, we will sing this song about inadequate financing for a long time. So this is where we need to strengthen. And I think, to me, initiatives like ICLEI's Transformative Action Program, TAP, or the C40 Climate Action Planning, or the C40 Cities Finance Facility are addressing that challenge. And to me, we have seen through these initiatives, we have seen ICLEI affiliated cities being supported to come up with really proposals that are solid, that we can actually look for investment for. We have seen cities within also the ICLEI network and the Covenant of Mayors Sub-Saharan Africa, looking at developing action plans, not just thumbs-up action plans, but using solid tools. In C40, we also have a climate action planning program, doing the same, supporting them to have solid climate action plans and go ahead to actually do action prioritization and look for money in those areas. And for me, that's where I see opportunities, and we need to really make sure that we identify some specific transformative actions that actually change the direction of the region. A good example is clean energy. You see load shedding, power blackouts, and outages are common in most African cities. The number of people that do not have access to clean energy is alarming in Africa. And governments are under pressure from investors, from business, from citizens to provide energy security. If we as a climate change movement do not develop solid plans on clean energy and bankable proposals on clean energy, governments will actually go for the quick fix. And we'll be waking up one day, we'll be waking up to more fossil fuel driven energy sector. That's not what we want to see.
Thank you, Mr. Chikoko. We couldn't agree with you more. And now it is my pleasure to invite Mr. Sekao Sangare to address us on behalf of His Excellency, Mr. Jean-Claude Cassibrau, President of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. The floor is yours.
Madame la Vice-Secrétaire Générale des Nations Unies, Madame la Ministre de l'Environnement de la République du Rwanda, Mesdames et Messieurs les maires d'Afrique, Monsieur le maire de la ville de Kigali, Madame Kobe Brand, directrice régionale Afrique du Conseil international des initiatives environnementales locales, distingués invités, Mesdames et Messieurs. Je voudrais d'abord remercier Madame Kobe Brand, directeur régional de l'initiative Afrique, pour son invitation adressée à la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, CEDEAO, à prendre part à ce congrès virtuel qui porte sur les solutions climatiques locales. Je me réjouis que ce 5e congrès est organisé en partenariat avec la Convention des maires en Afrique subsaharienne et co-organisée par le gouvernement de Rwanda, la ville de Kigali et l'Association rwandaise des autorités des gouvernements locaux. Je saisis cette occasion solennelle pour vous transmettre les cordiales salutations de son Excellence M. Jean-Claude Cassibrou, président de la commission de la CEDEAO. Mesdames et messieurs, notre continent, l'Afrique, fait face depuis plusieurs décennies à une variabilité climatique et des événements météorologiques extrêmes enregistrés dans toutes ces zones écoclimatiques, qu'elles soient côtières, forestières, de savane, sahéliennes ou désertiques. En application des dispositions de l'accord de Paris sur le climat, les récentes études réalisées par le groupe d'experts intergouvernemental sur l'évolution du climat, le GIEC, pour comprendre les impacts sur le continent africain d'un réchauffement de 1,5 degré Celsius, ces études, dis-je, montrent que pendant les 50 dernières années, on a observé un réchauffement d'environ 0,5 degré Celsius sur l'ensemble du continent africain et une évolution marquée des caractéristiques des événements climatiques extrêmes. Dans notre espace ouest africain, les hausses de température sont enregistrées partout. Et au Sahel, les températures atteignent facilement 45 degrés, voire 50 degrés à l'ombre. Si rien n'est fait en termes d'atténuation, la température mondiale atteindrait 1,5 degré entre 2030 et 2052. Ceci aura des impacts considérables pour l'Afrique et de manière plus prononcée pour les zones sahéliennes, désertiques et même côtières où, entre autres, on s'attend d'une part à des sécheresses beaucoup plus fréquentes, comme c'est le cas aujourd'hui au Cap-Vert, et d'autre part, au recul du trait de côte au niveau des villes côtières. Nous assistons également déjà à l'assèchement et à l'ensablement de nombreux cours d'eau, à l'appauvrissement et à la disparition de la biodiversité dans certaines zones. Cette situation est corroborée par le récent rapport sur l'état du climat en Afrique de 2019, publié par l'Organisation météorologique mondiale, qui a d'ailleurs prédit une augmentation de fortes précipitations avec des risques d'inondations accrus en milieu urbain et des pluies diluviennes sur la côte sud de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, qui affecteront les populations aux habitats précaires. En Afrique australe, les sécheresses vont se multiplier, nous indique ce rapport de l'EMM sur le climat en 2019 en Afrique, avec des vagues de chaleur plus intenses et plus longues. En Afrique du Nord, le même rapport indique que la plupart des modèles climatiques convergent vers une baisse importante des précipitations. Mesdames et messieurs, face à ces calamités qui menacent finalement la vie, il est indéniable que l'Afrique puisse trouver des solutions adaptées à ces conditions. Je voudrais donc me réjouir de l'opportunité que nous offre le présent congrès, qui nous permet, après des réflexions globales et générales, de nous concentrer sur les solutions locales pour faire face aux impacts du changement climatique. Il est bon de noter à cet égard que la communauté économique des États de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, CEDEAO, et ses États membres ont entrepris des actions en matière d'amélioration de la gouvernance locale, de renforcement des capacités d'observation, d'identification et de mise en œuvre de mesures d'adaptation et d'atténuation soutenues, avec une stratégie de mobilisation de ressources et de financement qu'il me plaît de partager avec vous. En matière de gouvernance environnementale, nous avons, au niveau de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, incité les gouvernements à intégrer dans l'élaboration de leurs contributions déterminées au niveau national, au niveau de leurs plans et programmes, des actions ciblées sur les réseaux et associations des communautés et collectivités locales, ainsi que sur des catégories d'acteurs comme les jeunes et les femmes. Compte tenu du fait que la plupart des solutions proposées aujourd'hui face au réchauffement du climat sont liées à l'eau, à l'agriculture durable ou encore aux énergies renouvelables, et que ces solutions proposées pour la plupart n'intègrent ni la biodiversité, ni les écosystèmes et leurs services, nous avons, au niveau de la CEDEAO, renforcé la collaboration avec les institutions régionales spécialisées, notamment le Centre régional Agrimet, qui est devenu le Centre régional climatique pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest et le Sahel. Ceci permettra de renforcer l'observation à partir de stations, la collecte et le traitement de données et des informations pour les principaux acteurs, notamment les communautés locales, et ce qui leur permettra ainsi de conduire des actions innovantes aussi bien en milieu rural qu'en milieu urbain. Les collectivités locales ont donc un rôle extrêmement important à jouer dans la bataille contre le changement climatique. Nous devons travailler donc ensemble au sein de votre association pour que l'ICLEI puisse davantage densifier son réseau en Afrique, et notamment en Afrique de l'Ouest et au Sahel. Sur le terrain en Afrique de l'Ouest, plusieurs techniques endogènes d'adaptation au changement climatique existent déjà. Elles sont le fruit de savoirs traditionnels longtemps mis en œuvre par les populations locales. Il s'agit, entre autres, du zaï, des cordons pierreux, des forêts sacrées. Il existe aussi, et de plus en plus, d'autres stratégies qui découlent des connaissances et des expériences accumulées depuis ces 5 dernières décennies qui remontent à la grande sécheresse des années 1970. On peut à cet égard citer la mise en valeur des bas-fonds, la protection des berges des cours d'eau, mais aussi, de plus en plus, la construction d'ouvrages de stockage des eaux pluviales superficielles, l'aménagement des sites des puits artésiens. Par ailleurs, il me plaît d'insister que d'autres innovations nouvelles doivent être promues. Il s'agit de la promotion, entre autres, des cuisinières solaires, notamment pour les femmes, en vue de réduire les pressions énormes qui s'exercent sur nos forêts, partout, aussi bien dans les zones arides et semi-arides ou dans les savanes et les zones forestières de nos pays. Il faudrait également développer la contractualisation avec les communautés et les populations locales pour développer les plantations forestières avec usage d'espèces à intérêt socio-économique reconnus par les communautés elles-mêmes. De développer aussi la petite irrigation solaire exploitant des nappes aquifères ou des lacs ou des mares d'eau. Il s'agit également de promouvoir la gestion durable de nos forêts humides et semi-humides, de savanes ou dans les zones sahéliennes, tout en essayant d'intensifier la lutte avec les populations locales et leurs représentants contre les feux de brousse et l'érosion de nos terres. Nous avons également en matière d'atténuation les nouvelles technologies innovantes telles que la RED ou la promotion de véhicules électriques comme le Rwanda a su bien le faire et pour lesquels nous lui adressons tous nos encouragements. Mesdames et messieurs, le développement et la mise en œuvre de ces actions de lutte contre les changements climatiques, même celles qui sont locales, nécessitent la mobilisation de financements énormes au regard des défis. En effet, le financement du changement climatique est au cœur de toutes les discussions en cours sur le climat. Cependant, il convient de souligner que malgré l'existence de plusieurs fonds climat mis en place sous l'égide de la communauté internationale, les ressources financières annoncées sont certes insuffisantes devant l'ampleur des besoins, mais aussi et surtout nos capacités institutionnelles d'absorption de ces ressources sont actuellement très faibles. Afin de contribuer à surmonter tous ces obstacles et renforcer nos capacités institutionnelles d'absorption des ressources, la Commission de la CEDEAO, pour sa part, appuie depuis plusieurs années ses États membres en termes de renforcement de leurs capacités pour la maîtrise des procédures, le développement de notes conceptuelles et la préparation de projets de qualité pour accéder enfin aux 10 fonds, notamment le Fonds vert climat et le Fonds d'adaptation. Ces efforts semblent peut-être insuffisants et c'est pourquoi il nous faut innover en mettant à contribution nos ressources domestiques. Dans cette dynamique, la Commission de la CEDEAO et ses partenaires ont développé et lancé l'initiative ouest-africaine de l'agriculture durable face au climat, WACSA, qui est un mécanisme de financement mixte dont le financement catalytique est assuré par la CEDEAO elle-même. Cette initiative soutient l'adoption de pratiques agricoles durables face au climat, en fournissant des subventions pour l'assistance technique et des prêts à taux bonifiés, des garanties et des prises de participation pour les organisations de petits exploitants agricoles et les entreprises agricoles. WACSA met à contribution les institutions financières locales. Environ 80% de la facilité de financement sera consacrée aux lignes de crédit qui seront acheminées par des intermédiaires tels que les banques locales et les institutions de microfinance. Elle implique également les petits agriculteurs, les organisations d'agriculteurs et les systèmes agroalimentaires pour stimuler l'adoption de pratiques de l'agriculture durable ou intelligente face au climat. Cependant, les défis en matière d'adaptation et d'atténuation demeurent encore énormes au regard de la recrudescence des effets et impacts du climat. Pour ce faire, le partenariat Sud-Sud est indispensable pour assurer le transfert et la valorisation des solutions et technologies endogènes. Il est important donc que ce partenariat se fasse à différentes échelles, au sein de nos pays, entre nos régions géographiques et en collaboration avec nos partenaires techniques et financiers. Bien sûr, ceci devrait se faire en évitant les cloisonnements. La CEDEAO, pour terminer, voudrait réaffirmer ici sa disponibilité et toute sa volonté à renforcer sa collaboration avec les autres communautés économiques régionales et l'Union africaine et avec l'ensemble de la communauté des municipalités et des organisations de la société civile pour promouvoir davantage les solutions climatiques locales en vue d'accentuer la synergie d'action et, partant, de renforcer la lutte contre le changement climatique. Je voudrais donc réitérer mes remerciements aux organisateurs pour avoir associé la commission de la CEDEAO à cette importante rencontre. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, sir. Before I hand over to our final speaker, we have received some well wishes from our previous LoCS4Africa hosts, the city of Ekurhuleni, South Africa. The Honourable Mayor Zwandile Masina sent these words to us. The city of Ekurhuleni, like many others around the world, cannot return to business as usual in the aftermath of the coronavirus crisis if humanity is to escape catastrophic climate breakdown. It is of utmost importance that we as African leaders take up the challenge and commit to putting greater equality and climate resilience at the heart of our recovery plans. The central theme of Finance for Change of this year's LoCS4Africa is perfectly apt. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the vast inequality in our society and deep flaws in the design of our local economy, and the unfortunate consequences are directly interconnected to the vulnerable and deprived communities more than anyone else. It is therefore critical that we, as leading African cities, come together to solve these interconnected issues. Climate action at the local government level and coordination with the business community now plays a more important role than ever in developing climate solutions. I wish ICLEI Africa, the government of Rwanda, the city of Kigali, and the Rwandan Association of Local Government Authorities all the best in hosting this landmark event. Thank you so much to the Honourable Mayor for these words. I now hand over to our final speaker as part of this opening ceremony of LoCS4Africa, Ms. Kobe Brunt, who is the Deputy Secretary General of ICLEI and the Regional Director of ICLEI Africa. The floor is yours.
Ministers, mayors, UN leaders, industry champions, all delegates of LoCS4Africa 2020. It truly is an honor to address you today, particularly after listening closely to each of the inspirational interventions before me from global and regional leaders. The message is clear. The time for action is now. We have a collective responsibility as leaders working in African cities to heed this call and to utilize every resource available to us to enact the changes necessary to reduce structural inequality, which is so prevalent on our continent, and to redesign our cities in response to the current health pandemic in ways that systemically tackle the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis. As a city and subnational network organization, working with so many subnational governments across this wonderful continent, we see the deep-rooted challenges and problems. We remember the devastation of the cyclones Idai and Kenneth last year, that in Mozambique alone left 2.5 million people in need of humanitarian service, 1.3 million of which were children. The images of the devastation caused by these cyclones will stay with us for many years, and for some of us for the rest of our lives. But we are also inspired deeply on a daily basis by African-led innovations. I think of M-Pesa, Africa's most successful and widespread mobile money service that provides access to financial services for millions of people who have a mobile phone but do not have or only have limited access to a bank account. The focus of this year's LoCS4Africa is finance for change, and we are looking for innovations like this that can unlock finance for projects that transform our cities into green, safe, livable and thriving locations for current and future generations. A huge thank you to our co-hosts, the Government of Rwanda, the City of Kigali, and the Rwandan Local Government Association for taking this leap of faith with us to move LoCS4Africa onto a virtual platform. This event would not have been possible without partners such as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa initiative, the European Commission, and the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, and many others, such as Sweet Bio and the Stockholm Resilience Centre. We look forward to co-developing with all of you over the next 2 weeks the African Cities Climate Finance Roadmap, which we as ICLEI commit to taking forward with our cities and all our partners and friends, a roadmap that must benefit African cities first and foremost and in tangible ways. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those insights, Ms. Brand, and for inspiring us to engage not only in dialogue, but also to find solutions that we can action on the ground in the years to come. And thank you so much to all our guests for your insights, for the passion that you've shown as we kick off ICLEI Africa's 5th Local Climate Solutions for Africa Congress. From me, Eleni Jarkos, I hope to see you in person next time, and good luck and all the best for the next 8 days.